Hey, and welcome to VFX Tutors. I'm Josh, and in this tutorial we're going to be continuing our VFX core skills for beginners. So in our previous one we made some really basic textures and substance and just got a really sort of testing a basic overview of substance. It wasn't really a thorough tutorial on it, it was just more let's just make some textures and play with some masks and do some exporting. But yeah, if you want to learn more on Substance, there are tons of tutorials on YouTube that'll teach you loads. They're all really good, and it should give you a much more in-depth sort of training in it. In this tutorial, we're going to be applying our shaders in Maya and doing a little bit of look dev. So all we're going to be doing is a really basic tutorial. We're just going to only be applying our shaders, do a small bit of look dev, make a little lighting rig and test it against a Studio HDRI. So it's just going to be really basic, and hopefully it shouldn't take too long. But if you do want to learn more about lighting and look dev, and probably Substance as well, there's tons of stuff on YouTube and some great resources out there. A channel that I'd probably recommend is check out Arvid Schneider's. He's got a ton of stuff on lighting, look dev, and now Substance, and I think most VFX artists have looked at his channel at some point and learned quite a lot from him. So I'll stick a link in the comments or description, but yeah, you should definitely check out his channel. I'm sure you probably already am following him. I'm just not sure why I'm doing this when people like him are doing YouTube channels, but anyway, it's yeah, you should check him out, and he'll give you much more thorough, in-depth lighting sort of stuff. But anyway, let's get going with this. And if you've been liking these tutorials, hit that like and subscribe for more like this. So I've opened up Maya, and I've got my previous file in that we imported our ZBrush base mesh into. You can be using any software. You can be using 3ds Max, Blender, or anything. It's all sort of, the rules really kind of apply throughout. I just use Maya because I've always used Maya. So in this one we're just going to do some really basic look dev and shading. So the first thing that we kind of want to do is, if you haven't got this or haven't modeled this, you can just, it's in the description, you can download it. It's just a really basic bird box, and also the textures as well. But yeah, I'd check out the previous tutorial so you just get a good idea of all the sort of pipeline workflows. But anyway, so we've got our base mesh, and the first thing that I'll do is, let's just check we've got nothing on here. That's fine. I'm going to right click, add new material, and I'm just going to call it, I'm just going to select the AI standard surface, and I'm going to call this bird box MTL, and it's just bird box material. And I'm going to leave it as it is now. I'm not going to apply anything, because after I've done this, now I've got an Arnold shader on it. I want to make a really basic light rig. And if you haven't done lighting before, you usually always start making a very basic 3-point lighting rig, which is really simple to do, and you can elaborate on it, but I think most people learn that first. So we're going to build some lights. First, I do like to do this when I'm making my 3-point. This is just my thing, not everyone does this. I'm just going to make a curve. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to, instead of moving around the lights all the time, it's easier for me to select different curves. It's like a little basic light, almost like a little rig, but much simpler. And I'm just going to call this key, CTR out. And this is going to be for our key light. So I'm just going to freeze the transforms on that. I'm just going to duplicate. And then I'm just going to call this my fill. And you can just make lights if you want, but I just find it easier having controls for it. Control D. And we'll call this rim. So, as you can say, your basic 3-point lighting rig consists of 3 lights, your key, fill, and rim. These are sometimes called, people call it other things, but I think that's pretty much the universal sort of names to them. So we'll just select these and just freeze the transforms. So these just make it easier for me to move around, so I can just like rotate it around on a particular axis. But you can just move them around normally. So I'm just going to go up to the top in my Arnold, and I'm going to use lights. I'm just going to make an area light. And it will come in at the origin. And it should be like this. And you can rotate it around. And you can scale it up. The one thing that you've got to remember is when you do scale up these Arnold lights, it does affect the intensity and the softness of them. So imagine that it's at normal size. It will check. It's easier to explain when we turn the lights on, as I should say. So I'm just gonna actually go to my orthographic, go top, and I'm just gonna place my key light. Ooh, let's just rotate in one axis. And I want my key light going across this way. It's just going to be a really simple light rig. And mostly for the only reason that I scale these up is just so I can see it. And I'm just going to call this key. Then I'm going to drop it under my key control. So that means I can just select this in here. And I can rotate this around any way I want. And just it makes it easier for me. But not everyone does that. And it just means I can do all this. And just reset it back. Cool, so we've made a key light. In fact, and you can edit the rotation of it a bit as well. But it shouldn't make so much. Cool, so we've made our first light. Pretty simple, nothing amazing. And we can check this by going to our Arnold. And we get Arnold Renderview. It's just gone up over here. Ooh. So I'll just bring this in. And if you just click play at the top, chances are you won't see anything. So we need to play with our intensity. So when you click on your attribute editor, you have intensity and exposure. And you can drag up the exposure or the intensity. Chances are it's probably quite a lot at the moment, quite a large number. So we're looking at so if we select our film gate and zoom in so we can actually see. So like I said before, when we, at the start, when I said, when we scale this, we change the intensity. Well, it's not doing it now. There we go. See how scaling it changes it in the render view. It's quite a large difference. So when you scale it, don't negative scale it. You can see that it's getting more intense. So that's just a thing to keep an eye out for if you're scaling up your lights. So if you've gone in and gone, well, let's scale them massive, and you're putting in crazy values, and they're not working, and you're like, oh, why is 1,000 not working? Let's try 5,000, and let's try 8,000, and it's still really dim. It's probably because you maybe have scaled your lights a little bit too big. So now if we scale this down, it's currently still on 8,000, so this will probably be quite intense when we bring this down. So and you can see now we've scaled it down, and the intensity's changed quite a bit. So that's always a good thing to keep in mind. Most of the time, you only really need to scale it to as a visual purpose, I think. So let's put that down to 1,000. Or we put that to 1. And change our exposure to 5. And we can just bring it up until we start. We just work with lower numbers. They work slightly different. I'm not going to go into the difference between them. But what we'll do, we'll just leave our intensity at 1, and we'll just work with our exposure for now. And we're going to work on our key light. And I've left the spec on this so we can see some reflections and help with our key. key light, sorry. Rim light, sorry. When we get to that. So if I just put this at 10. And you know, we can get the same. So when we scale it, changes it. So we can scale this down. We can have it quite small if need be. But then we can also change that with this called the spread. So we don't need crazy high exposures. So we can bring our spread down. And you can see how that's affecting it now. So it's getting more like a spotlight. So our spread's going a bit up. So if we put that back. So if we bring that all the way down, we can see that now that's pretty much just projecting the exact shape of our light. So this is a lot of other stuff that you kind of have to go into when you do sort of lighting as well. It's all sort of stuff that when you go into more advanced lighting, you'll sort of dig more into this, but it's just kind of, this is not an advanced tutorial. This is just get some basic 3-point lighting. So I'm just going to change my spread, bring down my exposure. And we've just done our key light, basically. And key light is basically just one single light highlighting almost just directly what it's in. And you notice if we look around, everything else is pretty much in pure darkness. And it's kind of almost lit. A bit like space. So our next light that we'll do is our fill light. So our fill light will fill in these dark areas. So I'm just going to go back to my orthographic top. I'm actually going to duplicate my key light and just press Shift P it out. And rename this to fill. And I'm going to drop it under my fill control. Now I can just rotate this around. Back to perspective. And if I just turn on my Arnold Renderview, I can see now it's filled in that. But we've got the same intensity as our key light, which we don't want. You know what, let's press 3. Yeah, let's don't ask again, subdivide that so it's not so crinkly in the render. Cool, and you can see that our fill light is too much because we don't want 2 key lights. So what we want to do, we want to bring this down. And this is really dependent on your sort of how you want to do it as well. You obviously don't want, when you're doing look dev, you want to be able to see all parts of your model, but you don't want everything in full blown sort of blasting light. You want to sort of represent some sort of natural lighting in a clean environment, if you know what I mean, because we're not changing any of the colors. We don't want any of the lights to affect any of the colors on our textures. So I'm not even going to change anything else but the exposure on it. I should bring it down so it's just not so bright. So now we have our key light. If we just zoom around, we can see our key light is working nicely on the side. So if we go to the back facing, we can see it's a little bit dark around the back. So let's actually select our fill light and this. Remember when we scale it out, we make it softer. So if we bring that in, we can make it softer and it's covering more of the back. Let's just bring up some of this exposure. Cool, so it's not all in complete darkness. And that's kind of why I like to keep on. And you can just move these around manually if you want, it's entirely up to you. So now let's just do our rim light for our final light. And what we will do is, I'm actually going to duplicate my key light, Control D and Shift P. Because I imagine my fill light will be close to my key, rim. So I'm going to put this under my rim. So your rim light's pretty self-explanatory. It's sort of the rim lighting. If we just turn on our and we can see that we've got our sort of rim lighting here. We can change the hardness and softness by scaling this out if we want to, or we can change the spread. See how it's kind of a lot less now, but we have got a small amount of rim light here, so if we see how it's just picking up. And like I said, this is just a really basic sort of 3-point lighting, and it depends on what you're doing, to be honest. But other than that, what we can do is, because we're seeing it in quite a low resolution, we can go to our render settings, scroll down, and let's just go to 720. And let's just frame it a little bit better. Ooh. Press play. Cool. And you can see we've got, so what we can do, I'm just going to hide those. I think it's probably good enough. And I'm just going to stop that and snapshot. Then I'm going to unhide the fill light. Just render that again, just so we can compare in the snapshots. And that's just by clicking the little camera down here. See how we've got that rim light there. And we can sort of play around with that actually a little bit more, because it's I think something like that should be fine. And play around with this and you'll get different results. So if we just double click on this, we can look at our first snapshot, and we can compare between the two of the snapshot with the key and the fill. Then the key, fill, and the rim light. You can see how I've just added some extra sort of rim lighting around here and a bit more specular. But you can have a play around, and it just sort of makes your objects more dynamic and makes them, I guess, pop out a little bit more. But yeah, and that's pretty much it. I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's just a basic three-point lighting rig, and we will then load in our HDRI as well, so we can have a look at that. So I'm just going to bring this over here. Just going to save this, save scene as, and I'm going to save it in look dev. I'm just going to call it look dev. I'll just call it VO5. And I'll always save as Maya ASCIIs, just in case it goes corrupt. We can save it. So we've made our basic 3-point lighting rig. And I'm just going to leave that as it is, actually, to be honest. And now what we can do, we can load in, we can see what it looks like with a Studio HDRI. Sometimes it's just easier to use a Studio HDRI as well. So I'm going to go back to Arnold Lights and choose Skydome Light. And this will load in a giant dome and it'll be called Skydome Light. And we'll just call this Skydome Light Studio. And all we can do is just go to our color, select the little checker box, go File, select the folder. Then you should have this as well. Data, Look Dev HDRI, Small Studio HDRI. It's quite large, but as you can see, it should come up here and it's basically a studio. And it should take a while to load in. Hopefully not too long. And your color space should switch to raw. And you can sort of see now our whole sort of Skydome is got the studio light. So now if we, let's turn off our key lights because we don't want multiple lights. We're just going to use the HDRI to light it. So now if we come back to here, just turn it off. Obviously the lighting is probably going to be much nicer with the HDRI because it just always is. Well, it's not necessarily true. To make lighting work with just all the light, it's more advanced lighting, and this is just basic. So, and it should update the Arnold scene and make the. And you can see it's quite overexposed. So let's frame it. Let's bring our intensity down to 0.5, 0.1. See, that's much nicer. What if we? As you can see, it's quite grainy, and we can change our samples if we want. Let's try it on 4 for now. It'll probably be quite. Obviously, the more samples you put on, it's going to take longer to render. But you can already see that it's kind of cleaned up already. And you see that's just straight in from the HDRI, so it's quite a nice render. When you're working with 3-point lighting, it takes a lot of work to get a really nice sort of look. But yeah, have a play around and see what you can get. So yeah, and that's pretty much it for our lighting stuff. So we're actually going to start applying our shaders. I know I've gone on for quite a while just talking about this, but I probably shouldn't have moved that, but yeah, we can see the difference. A really basic 3-point lighting and our HDRI. Cool, so we've done that and we've done our light, so let's just hide that for now. So what we need to do is go to our model and go to our bird box material. So this is going to be really simple and quick. So at first I'm just going to load everything in through the attribute editor. So I'm going to go to base, select color, file, and first I'll change my UV tiling mode to Udemari. Then I'll go to my image name. I'm going to go to my textures. Nope, I'm going to go to my substance textures. And you should see these. Oh, I forgot to change the name on that on the initial shading group. Whoops. And you can see that all our textures are now here, but with a sort of a numbering of 1001 to 1021. And these correlate to your UV spaces. So I'm just going to select open. You don't have to select them all. And it should automatically find 13 tiles. What I mean, it corresponds to the UV tiles. It should, yeah. So you see 1001, 1002, and it corresponds to all these. Let's close that. Cool, so we've gone to our color, loaded in our base color, selected UV tiling mode, and the color space is sRGB. So we won't be able to see anything yet because our shading will be just on normal viewport shading, but we can select hardware texturing. Depending on how fast your computer is and what sort of graphics card you got, you may get different results. But you'll need to go up to render a viewport, open it up, and change your max texture resolution. So I'm just going to change this to 6K. Reload all textures and regenerate all UV tile textures previews. Let's max this out. Sometimes it takes a while to load. Generate preview. Anyway, let's not worry about it for now. There we go, it's come in. So now we've got our textures on. And it's a really basic texture. And if we go back to our put our sky down back on. Before I do this, actually, I will. Because our specular weight is on 1, so I'm just going to turn that all the way down first. So this is just the diffuse, so with the HDRI lighting. So it's going to update the Arnold scene, and it's going to convert the files. I've just completely forgotten what they're called, the TX files. And you can see it's loaded in our very basic texture. And it seems to work okay. Obviously, it's not the best texture in the world, but it's working. So we've loaded that one in. So we've got our base. So now we want to go down to our Specular Roughness. File. And you can see now where the TX is made, it's made it into the file as well. So we'll just go down to, obviously there's loads of other things in here that we probably won't need to use. Cool, so we've loaded that in now. And we won't render it on everyone, so we're just going to load in everything, then we can just have a look. So we've done our specular, then the only thing we can do now is our bump mapping. So at the moment we can change, if you're using your normals, you change it to tangent space. And change your bump value. Go to your normals. Got normals DirectX here as well. I don't know why there's exported, but anyway. And we can select our normals. And we need to make sure we check our UDIMs as well. And this will probably go a little bit funky because we've got hardware texturing on, so we can actually turn that off. So the likelihood of this working straight out of the box is, who knows? Let's try it. So just press play. It's going to go through and convert all the files to TXs. We forgot to check if our normals came in as raw, which is we should check straight away after this. Or always check if it comes in as raw. It's not coming in as something else. So we've got something a bit funky going on here. So we'll try and figure out what's going on with that. Okay, so our did come in as sRGB. So make sure that comes in as raw. I forgot to change that. So you will have to, if we go render, update full scene. Hopefully that should overwrite the TX files. Oh, it says so it could be because we're just using so this looks like something has gone a bit strange on this geo, or it could be. So let's turn this off. Let's turn in our really basic 3-point lighting, see what that looks like. And update full scene. Possibly something to do with the studio light. So we can sort of see we've got some very basic textures on here. Nothing special, it's pretty ultimately very basic. So what I will do is just adjust, because we did this 3-point lighting rig with just white textures, I'm going to adjust it to work better with these textures. So I'm just going to play around with it. And this, like I said, this is not a full-on lighting tutorial. And to be honest, probably will just use let's just take a snapshot of that. I've got a feeling it's probably just the rotation of so let's rotate that 90 degrees. Also, let's go to here and see how that's now fine. Let's turn our visibility off our camera. Cool. It's just because it's very hard to get this all on one screen. So let's bring up, let's try 0.2. So like I say, it's just very basic, and we probably need to go into the shaders and tweak them, especially the normal maps, because it's looking really flat at the moment. And it's not looking great. So what we'll do is just do some more finer tweaks. It doesn't look like and you can choose between use normal or bump mapping. Let's try we would have to, yeah, let's just bring in our height map, change this to raw. To put that back to bump. And we will need to put a remap on this. So now this is going to change that. And you can see that's working quite well now. It's probably because we need to switch out the normal. You can see our bumps working in there. Probably a bit too much. But anyway. Cool. So let's stop that. Let's set up a frame where we can sort of see most of it. Then we can panels, tear off a copy. actually, oh no, let's not tear off a copy. Let's view, create camera from view. We'll just call this perspective cam. Sometimes you have to close it to reopen it for it to update full scene. There we are. Now we've got two. You can see our bump's way too high at the moment. Let's just get our framing. Just do some basic position. I'm just going to go back to my normal perspective so I can move around and it won't change. Cool. So what we want to do is go to our Hypershade. And hopefully we're not going to take too long doing this. I don't know why it's so big. It's probably because I had it on my other. And I always like to make sure this is off and this is off as well. So you should have all your materials and default materials, Lambert, but what we want is our AI standard. So if you middle mouse click that in, and it should open up your texture node. And if you click this middle button, it will open up our sort of hypergraph of our shader network. So it's going to be quite difficult to let's try and get this all in one screen. Cool. So in fact, actually what I'm also going to do is go to my render settings. We're not going to render any AOVs for this, but I do want, sometimes it's quite nice to have a specular so you can see it. And probably that's it really. I'm just going to have specular and beauty just so it's easier sometimes to see. Close that. If I just update full scene, I can now choose specular in here. So now we have nothing. So we need to have a look at that. So let me try and organize this so we can see it. I don't want to window it because sometimes it's a bit annoying. Cool. So we've got our render up here. So our first thing that I'm going to do is go to and just organize this. So it's I don't know. It's just annoying sometimes that it does that. So with this specular roughness, the first thing that I'll do is disconnect this. Ooh. Select my R channel and drag that into there. So now if we press play, go to our specular. Can't see it. So I'm just going to open a remap. Ooh. Remap value. Output value. I think it might actually be because I changed the specular weight all down to 1. So that might explain it. So now if I click play, there we've got our specular roughness. I was like wondering why that was not showing anything. That was a bit strange. But yeah, make sure your weight's up. And now we can see how our specular roughness is working. So this is quite a, there's not much fill light in this HDRI. So we can just rotate it around until we get a nice sort of angle so we can see a lot of this speck. And we can see it's quite, so if we actually go back to our beauty and look at it, it's looking kind of wet. It's not looking, well, if we region render that, it should go faster. And yeah, it's looking a bit wet. So what we can do, I like to, it's easier to see sometimes when you've just got the specular pass. I'm making a mess of these windows right now, but anyway. So we did put our remap value in there, and we were still going to do that anyway, because I just want to show you how it affects it. Cool, so if we select our remap, and we can select a curve. So I've just clicked on this little arrow here, and I always tend to start in the middle. I like to go to the extremes and see. It's just nice to look at it really sometimes, and just see what you can get from your specular map. So if we bring it all the way over, it's going to look much more drier, and we can bring it down to a really wet model if we want. And this is how you can sort of control your the sort of environments your stuff's in. So we can make it super shiny, and it's a bit extreme. But with this, the specular is probably one of the most important sort of textures to get sort of right, because it really does make things stand out and make them not look flat. So we don't want that much specular at all. So I just want to check that it's the right way around. Because on mosses, oh, we've made 2, which we don't want. You can obviously do it to however you want. So we've got some slight roughness here, not loads. Even then I feel that's probably a bit too much for. And we can still change this slightly. When we bring it into our scene. You can see how that's affecting the colours. It's getting quite all washed out at the moment. Probably because of the lighting, because it's just white lighting. Cool, so we've done some really basic stuff with our spec, and I don't want to spend ages on this, because sometimes you could spend hours and hours and hours just playing around with this. And I don't really want to do that. That's up to how much you really want to do, but we'll just get something to a reasonable place. So I'm going to do the exact same thing with my height. So just going to make a press tab and just do a remap value. And go to my R. Bump value. And I'm going to do the same again. And you can see how we can change this. And it's looking pretty nasty now. So we can change this 2 ways. I kind of want to break it up a bit, because we can just lower the amount on it. I don't just want to lower the amount, I kind of want to change how it's affecting the maps. So if we completely remove it, you can see how smooth and soft it is. We definitely don't want smooth and soft. So it's kind of looking all right, just at that stage. It's pretty basic. It's nothing amazing, and we've got our nails that we need to do down there as well. Oh, let's press F. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that, how that is at the moment. So what we can do is so you can bring this all into one shader and just go into your metalness and add your metalness into that. But I kind of like to do this in a. In fact, let's just do it that way. Let's go into our. No, I'm going to do it separately. I like to do it separately because sometimes I might want to change how it looks in here, but I don't want to. And I'm sure with like advanced sort of texturing, you'll be able to do that. So I am just going to pack this all away and just select it all and Control C, Control V. Just copy that shader network. Bird box nails. Nope, that's not how you spell nails. Oh, I've got caps lock. Cool. So we've got bird box material there, and where is it gone? And pasted AI. Let's remove that pasted. And we've got our bird box now, so that's so we've just got that. And I suppose because we probably want to keep, if we keep it as one model, in fact, let's just do it that way. Let's do it I guess the correct way. Let's not do it my way. I sometimes do just like to keep it separate, but let's bring in our metalness. Probably should have done that from the start, but and we want to go to our metallic. So you can see on these, it's pretty much going to be all black because almost all of them are not metallic. And oh. Let's maybe it didn't export properly. So let's undo that. And continue with doing it separately. That was my fault. So what we will need to do is, I'm just going to drag this over to the right. We need to have this as a separate material, separate object. So let's turn that off. Probably easier just to select everything. Then just deselect the actual wooden parts. I know this is not ideal, but let's just go to our edit mesh and extract. And let's mesh combine so they're all together. Delete the history. Delete the history on that. So probably should have called this, done this in the first place, but we did this for substance. Z base mesh. I can't remember what it was called. Z mesh. So let's shift P that out of that old. Control C. I don't want this to go too long with bird boss. Z base mesh mess. Nails. Cool, so we've done that. So that's a bit of a, made a bit of a mess of that, sorry. So I'm just going to right click, hold it and assign existing material. And now that's got the nails one. So you see it won't affect any of the renders. Apart from now, although they are kind of rusty nails, we can, this kind of looks washed out, but let's bring this back. So if we bring the metal, we don't want the metalness too high. What we can do, we can bring down our specular on it as well. Because even though rust is, can't think of the word, it's not super metallic, but obviously these are metal. And now what we can do is, because we've copied this, we can actually change maybe I do want to actually do this as well for the nails. I hate how it jumbles it all around. No, just deselect. This is going way longer than I wanted it to go, but so what we can do is go AI, in fact, if we just type it jitter, AI color jitter, input, let's stop this. Out color, come on, there we go. So what we want to do is go down to here. So we've got user data, object, face. So we can change it by face and object, but we've actually, if we select this, we can just go modify mesh, separate. Now they're all separate objects. So if I now do go into here, it's just so we can break it up a little bit. And this is just got quite a cool little tool that you can use. So we've gone into object. And you can see it's done nothing, but if we turn up our gain, we can see that it's affecting them all slightly in different ways, gain max. But we don't want to do that, and if you say change your hue, you can't really see it, but saturation max, oh, that's up there. So we change the see it's a little bit purple now, which we don't actually want. So what we can do, we can change, you only need really small values. Just to break it up. So if you put 10 in there, it's obviously going to turn some nails into a funny, I think they're purple now. And obviously if you change a seed, they're going to change, but we don't want purple nails. We just want to break it up a very small amount. Like almost, you can barely even notice the difference, but they don't look all exactly the same. If we change the saturation on them. And to be honest, they are looking a bit, they do look a little bit too obvious, so I'm just going to remap HSV, hue saturation values. So I'm just going to, so should be able to see most of it. So if we just drag this up, we should see it all changing sort of green, which we don't want. We actually don't want to change the saturation hue, we want to change the saturation. Just so they're not so orangey, rusty. But this is all dependent on what you want. They're looking a little bit less standing out, a little bit more. Probably should have textured some sort of dirt in there as well, because they do look like they're kind of a bit out there alone. But let's not worry about it. It'll be fine. Cool. So what I will do is just go back to, I'm just going to middle mouse click this in here and select middle, go back to our remap on our specular. Just going to bring it down slightly. So you can change the input and output as well of it. You can see how this changes it. And you get quite a drastic change in it, so you can make it look really wet. You can flip them around, get a more matte look, but we don't want to do that. You just want to change it ever so slightly, because you can see how we've got a nice variation here, but it's kind of a little bit too much in the variation. Good. Just looking at very wet in that area. So it's much more subtle now. And maybe let's, because these remaps on most of them, so remap another HSV. And you can just have a play around with this. There's no, obviously, like when you're doing your own stuff and you're doing a bit more time, just have a play really. So we can oversaturate it, undersaturate it. I don't really want to actually do that, to be honest. I'm quite happy the way it looks with just the, it's obviously looking pretty flat because of our lighting. So I'm actually going to close this down. And I think we're in a pretty decent place. So I'm just going to hide that. I'm going to bring back my original lighting. Ooh, render, update full scene. You can see how that's much different now, because obviously our studio lights are not pushing so much white. It's looking quite all right, actually, for something that's done really quickly. Probably going to push over an hour, but yeah, I'm fairly confident that's probably all right for like your first sort of one. See, it looks a bit too, might be a bit too shiny on the front. We can see how our specular is being broken up here. And when you're playing with your, like obviously with look, you want to keep your lighting as natural as possible, because when you do the HDRI, it's going to be different. So chances are you'll probably have some color temperature, and you can see how much that changes. And if you're doing your look dev and you accidentally put like really orange lights on, you're going to probably break everything. So you can see how much now that's where it was looking fairly pale. when we add our HDRI with some actual color values, it's going to push it in to be a little bit more natural in shot. So we don't want to use any color temperature on our look dev light rig. We just kind of want it to look neutral. So yeah, I'm pretty much, I think pretty much done. I'm fairly happy with that. So make sure you save. I say it's not like an Oscar-winning asset, but it's something quick and easy that you can do. Like, I know it's taken an hour to get here, but yeah, this looks different from the one in the thumbnail because I've just done it all again from scratch. So let's take a snapshot of that. Then we can look at our progress. Not snapshot. Anyway, yeah, so we're pretty much done. Just trying to think what else we need to do. Ideally we could reference this, but I don't want to go into referencing because we want to keep it really simple. So what I will do actually is export this as a simpler sort of method, because ideally you'd probably want to keep this in your file and export as a reference. But I'm not going to go into that. We can do that a little bit later. I want to keep this as simple as possible. So I'm just going to go File, Export Selection, and you want to make sure you export it as MyRASCII, Bird Box. And this is just gonna, and I'll call it Asset Final, VO7, and export, and that's just gonna export that out. But ideally you'd want to keep it as a reference, so if you do need to change stuff, you can change it in this file, then it updates in your actual shot. But other than that, we're pretty much done. So our next step is to actually start with the actual lighting of the shot and setting it up. And we're pretty close to finishing this series. So yeah, I know it's gone on for another hour, and I'm sorry about that. I try to explain as much as possible, and even sometimes I mess up. So yeah. But anyway, if you've enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and subscribe for more like this.